Welcome to toy-polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from toy-polloi, and today we are going to be looking at repairing this vintage G1 Shockwave figure from Transformers. Now recently, if you've watched my videos, you'll have seen that I got a very generous donation from Michael Schaefer, who sent me a whole box of his childhood Transformers that had seen better days. And this is what we are going to be restoring today. Well, actually, the one on the right is the one that I've had in my collection for a very long time. I picked this up possibly about 20 years ago. When I first got it, it was missing its right arm and there was lots broken on it. I have to say, all I did was repair the arm, and then I gave up on it because he's such a hard figure to find in the UK. Finding parts for him was sort of nigh on impossible. So I got him in a state that he looked okay to display, and I just left him. But I think now it's time to actually try and finish him off and get him all working, and we're going to use the one that Michael sent in as a sort of a donor figure and try and work out ways to repair him using the donor figure, and maybe even get this one looking half decent as well, because there is most of him here. Now, common issues with this Shockwave are the electronics. I have to say both of the electronics work on these two figures, but this one on the left that Michael sent in, the cable that goes between his body and his arm, the one that lights up the barrel, has been ripped away, so we need to repair that. There was also a battery left inside his figure, but as you can see, it's gone rusty and a bit sort of degraded, but it hasn't leaked, so everything is fine inside that. Just a little bit of a clean and it should look pretty nice. But as far as I can see, the common issues with Shockwave are his legs. That seems to be a major issue. They don't lock in place. In fact, it's taken me quite a while to get these two figures just to stand up. If I even just sort of tap this one, you can see his left leg gives away. It just doesn't want to stay in place. So we're going to see if we can take these apart and get the legs to stay sort of locked in position so that he stays upright sort of more easily. The other issue that I've seen actually both of these figures have is that the front of the body is held on by two screws that go through the arms, and I think there's a spring here that sort of does the latch mechanism on the arms, but the spring is so strong it actually cracks the plastic. So you can see here this is actually split quite wide apart. The other figure has done exactly the same, and when that happens, the head then pops out, because the head is held in by the sort of the front part of the chest. And so we need to repair all of this chest section. We're going to take it apart, see if we can glue the pegs back in place or plastic weld them back in place, or do something, and maybe put in some slightly less strong screws, because that is what is pushing the whole of this front apart. You can see here how wide it has been pushed on this one. It's really quite sort of distorted. I'll show you the other figure as well. This one is not quite so bad, but you can see again it's done the same, and it has cracked the pegs at the top. So we need to work out a way to fix that and get that all sort of stable, so that we can make sure that Shockwave's head stays in place. And then it's really going to be a bit of wiring on this one, because that wire is ripped out. I want to replace that, and you can see that this has the full gun barrel, whereas my poor Shockwave on this side, the front of the gun barrel is missing. So I think I'm going to swap those over, and we'll make this right hand Shockwave the sort of the master Shockwave, if I can stand it. I might see exactly the same leg problems. We're going to make this one the sort of the nicest one we can, and we'll get this one looking reasonable as well, and we'll get all of his electronics working. But the first thing we need to do is actually give this one a bit of a clean. This has been stored, and I think it's also got a bit of battery leakage on it, so it smells a bit. I'm going to give this a very quick sort of cursory wash. I'm not going to dunk it in the water. I'm basically going to use a toothbrush, get some soapy water from toothbrush and just rub the surface over, and then dry it very quickly, because I don't want anything inside this to get damp. And once we've done that, we can start work on trying to fix some of these issues. that Shockwave is all clean and dry, I think the first thing I want to deal with is actually his wobbly legs, because it gets quite annoying that you can't sort of easily stand him up. Every time you sort of move him, he falls over. And I'm hoping this should be quite straightforward to fix. I've never actually worked on one of these Shockwave figures before, sort of tried to fix this, but let's just get straight on with it. So I can see on this side there are 4 screws, so I'm going to remove those, and we can have a look at the mechanism, and I'm hoping it will just be something as worn away or something quite easy to sort of deal with. I know Megatron has similar issues with his legs, so it could be that if I can fix it on this one, I can fix it on my Megatron as well, because he has the same problem. That's 4 screws removed, and we can take that apart. Right, it still needs a little bit more of a clean, and I'll see if I can work out why this isn't working. Okay, so I've taken both legs apart just so I can try and sort of work out what's going on. Certainly the metal feet, the reason they're loose is that they just don't really sort of have much grip on this little post here, so you can put those on and they're very sort of free to move. There's nothing, sort of no friction there, and I think we can easily fix that just with some PTFE tape. If we put some PTFE tape over the pegs on both sides when we push the legs together, that will give it enough sort of friction to hold that foot in place. Now the reason why they don't stay in place sort of on the knee joint, I'm going to say there's a few breakages actually on these legs. I've already fixed the ones on this side and it seems to be much better. I took the other leg apart, and you can see here some of these screw holes have completely shattered, so the screws aren't actually pushing anything together, they're not sort of holding anything together, everything is sort of loose. So I think that will help the repair. The way they work, if I just get Shockwave in, you can see on his leg there's a little tab there, this tab sort of, and that's supposed to sort of push along the outside edge of the leg, and there's a little notch, you can just about see it there, so when it reaches the top it's supposed to sort of click in place, and you can feel that does actually click in place. If you hold the 2 pieces together quite firmly, it clicks in place, and then you can sort of, you bend the leg slightly and it unclips and it sort of rolls down the inside of the leg. I think what happened over the years is a child sort of rotating this actually ends up breaking it slightly, so there's been a few cracks on the inside of the leg. You can see here there's a crack which I have just repaired with some plastic weld, and it does make quite a big difference. And I'm assuming on this side, because we've got these broken screw holes, let's see if this one is broken as well at the same point. Yeah, you can see it's broken here, so that's got quite a bit of flex to it that it shouldn't have. So again, I'm going to put some plastic weld there, and I'm going to repair both of these screw holes, again using plastic weld. This stuff is great if you're fixing old Transformers and old toys in general. It will sort of lightly melt the top surface of the plastic and then bonds the two together, and it's almost as good as new. So let's get these legs re-glued. I've just got to re-glue this whole screw sort of hole and then repair the bit at the top, and we'll see what happens. While waiting for the plastic weld to dry on the first set of legs, I thought I'd take apart the legs on the other Shockwave to see if it had the same problems, and it does, but I'd say probably much worse. There are far more cracks in the plastic here, and I think this might sort of not bode particularly well for the rest of the restoration. This plastic seems to have got very brittle, so every time a screw is sort of screwed into it, the plastic is splitting, and I think that could be why we're going to have so many issues when we get sort of further down this restoration, especially on the chest, because that's where I showed you in the introduction that there's a lot of cracks and the plastic has pulled apart. Now you can see here, this is the left leg. And the top of that one is not looking too bad, but if we look at the top of the other leg, you can see there's actually a split that's come all the way down here, and it goes right through where the screw hole is, and so the screw is not holding this top section together at all, which is why the leg mechanism doesn't work. So I've put a lot of plastic weld in there and sort of tried to push it all together, and I've got to let that dry. Plastic weld probably takes a couple of hours to sort of go off completely, especially on a large area like this. I'm going to leave it quite a long time, but basically all of the little sort of screw bits are falling apart. There's another one here that I've had to rebuild completely. It's shattered into sort of 3 or 4 pieces, so I put that all back together. The chances of it holding at the moment, I can't say. I don't expect it will hold particularly well. Maybe we can get the figure back together, but yeah, all of this plastic has gone very brittle, and that seems to be the issue, and it's going to cause us issues further down the line. But having said that, while I've got this apart, I pushed a bit of PTFE tape, which is this stuff, into the toe joint, and you can see this now rotates and also holds in place. So that will work quite nicely, stop the toes sort of rotating freely. So that is a good fix. The rest of it I'm just going to hold fire on, so I'm going to let all of this dry properly, and then we'll try putting it back together. But I can see that the plastic has gone incredibly brittle on these legs, and I think the rest of the figure is going to be much the same. While letting the plastic weld set and fixing up the broken legs on my sort of main Shockwave, I've actually managed to work out a good fix as well for the fact that this sort of latch mechanism is a little bit loose. What happens is this little tab is supposed to press into a hole on the outside of the leg, but it just doesn't press in hard enough. So what we're going to do to that is actually stick something on the inside that sort of gives it a little bit more push. And I've been searching through my sort of cupboard of bits and bobs, and I found this, which is sticky backed felt. Now this is the sort of thing that you would put under chair legs or behind pictures to stop it sort of marking the walls. You can buy it in all sorts of shapes and sizes. This is just a flat sheet that I have. So what I've done is I've cut a very thin strip of that off, and this is the same thickness as the little tab that you can see here. So I've cut this just to be wide enough to go onto there, and then I've cut off a few lengths of it that are just short enough to go over the sort of the main part of the clip, and I've laid that up so we've now got to 3 thick, because it's not quite thick enough. One layer is not thick enough, and I'm going to stick that onto there, and that is nice and soft, but it should have enough sort of pressure to push this little latch against the outside of the leg once it's in place. So that's what we're going to do there. I'm just going to quickly stick that in place. I've got a pair of tweezers just to get the sticky backing off. This stuff you can buy pretty much anywhere. I've bought it before and used it on other things. It's a very useful thing to have. If you don't have this, you could just get some felt and then use double-sided tape to sort of layer it up, but this works particularly well. So you can see here, this is the leg. I'm going to just drop that in. It only appears to be the left leg that's the problem on this figure, so I'm only going to do the left leg. But you can see that now that that's on, it's got enough sort of sponge and sort of push to it. When we put this side of the leg on, you can see it's just going to give it a little bit more push, and it will latch onto that. So that's how we're going to fix that bit. Then we want to deal with this foot that is a bit loose. That's straightforward, just a bit of PTFE tape. And again, I've shown this before on fixes. It's a great way of sort of stiffening up joints. So we cut off a small amount of that, and I'm going to fold this over a couple of times. Just a little bit like that, and then we'll push that onto the peg that the toe gets pushed onto, and then we can push this toe on, and that will just make that a little bit stiffer to move, and hopefully you won't be able to see that from the outside. So let's put this leg back together and we'll see how well it works. So that goes onto there, like so. Make sure the felt is sitting upright. The other part of the leg, we'll push that down. I'll screw this together and we can see how well that works. Okay, so here is Shockwave back together with both of those fixes in place, and you can see he's actually really quite firm now. You can jiggle him about and that leg stays in place. It is still movable, so you can move it about, but generally he's just a lot more sturdy. So I think that is a pretty good fix. So all you need is a small amount of this felt stuck onto the back of that tab, and it just sort of clicks in place a lot better. But as you can see, there were some other issues with these legs. They certainly do seem to be prone to cracking. The other one, of course, was the toe being a bit loose and floppy, but you can see now with the PTFE tape in place, that actually does hold in place and clips and stays where you want it. So again, quite a nice simple fix there, and both of those are non-permanent fixes, so if you ever want to remove them you can, but certainly makes displaying him a whole lot easier because he actually stands up.
P-O-Y, P-O-L-L-O-I.
We can now start to take a look at the top section and try and work out what's gone wrong with these shoulders. It does look like the two screw posts have snapped off. There are just 4 screws on the back, so I can unscrew those. It does look like I only need to undo the bottom 2 screws at the moment, just because the top 2 will have cracked away. So I'll remove those screws, keep them in a safe pot. We can also sort out the damaged wires that go to the arm of this Shockwave as well at the same time. So let's undo those screws. So, let's see what happens when we remove the front of this. Ooh, lots of things fall away. So that is the front section. I can see these are there's 2 little grommets which have fallen in. Let's just tip that forward. So there's one of the springs so it should sort of ratchet the upper arm. There's another of the springs. We'll take that off. That's one of the ratchets that you can see there. We can remove this arm completely, and we'll remove that arm completely because there was nothing holding that on. And there was another ratchet in there that I saw. I think it's fallen inside, so let's just get that out. There it is. So that's the other ratchet. So we can immediately see what's going on. These are the 2 posts that should be attached to here, which have snapped off completely, and that looks like, I'm going to say, because these springs are too sort of strong, pushing everything apart. So I'm going to remove those screws, and we'll get those posts out, and then we can plastic weld them back on. We'll just see what happens with that. But you can see here, that's the wire that should go out the back that attaches to his arm. That's one of them, and I'm guessing the other one should be soldered onto there. So I will also make some new wires, and we can reattach those. But to start with, I'm just going to continue dismantling this, and we can get those little screw posts out, and then we'll see what we can do. This is the front section of Shockwave, and you can see here these are the broken little screw posts. They should fit on here, and both of them have snapped. And I'm going to say this is going to be the same sort of issue that we're having with the legs, that the plastic has just gone brittle. So first thing I'm going to try is to just plastic weld those back in place. I would ideally like to sort of wrap something around them to make them sort of a bit thicker and a bit stronger, but I can't do that because they are used to hold the arms on. You can see the hole in the arm there actually slides over the top of the post. But if we sort of look closely at this, you can see that it has cracked there, and then the whole of the post actually has a crack down the middle of it as well. So I think plastic weld will certainly improve this. It's going to stick everything back together quite nicely because it's the way it melts the plastic. But whether it will be strong enough to pull the top part of this body in, you can see actually how bowed this is. That should be a straight line, and it's got quite a curve to it. And it's got a bit of flex to it. Certainly you can see that I can flex that back to being straight, but whether the screws will hold it sort of firm enough, we'll just have to wait and see. So I think let's get these plastic welded on, and while the plastic weld is sort of setting firmly, we can sort out the wiring and just replace those 2 missing wires. So I'm going to put a nice amount of plastic weld onto this just to start the plastic melting a little bit. We'll get the post. I'll push that on. Then I'm going to put plastic weld all around as well, and hopefully capillary action will pull it into the other cracks, and we'll sort of get that firmly stuck in place. I can actually see there's a bit missing on the bottom there where another bit of plastic has sort of fallen away. I might find some styrene, and I'll push that in there because that will melt and also form quite a good joint. But for now, let's just get this roughly set back. We'll do the same on the other side as well. The 2 cables that power the little light that is in Shockwave's gun there actually come off these 2 pegs on the circuit board that's inside his chest. As you can see, one of them is still attached. This is the black one. There should be 2 wires, a black and a white one. You can see the remnants of both on the sort of gun part here. So what I'm going to do is just replace those. I don't actually have any black wire. I've only got white wire, so I've just put a bit of marker pen on one of them so I can see. And I'm going to attach 2 fairly long pieces of wire at the moment so we can thread everything through. Then I will solder it onto the bulb at the end. But first thing to do is actually just to remove this old bit of wire. So I've got my soldering iron ready. We'll remove that and we'll put the new pieces of wire on. Then we can try and put his body back together. So here's the one that I've got with a bit of black marker pen on it, just so I can see. Solder that back on. Now we've got these two wires attached, I'm going to carefully sort of just twist them together a little bit, and then we can poke them through the hole on the back. If we look at the back of Shockwave, you can see next to the battery compartment there is a hole, and that's where the original sort of rubber hose would go. So we're just going to poke those through there. I do actually have a bit of hosing to put on. I found in my sort of spares and toolbox a piece of heat shrink which is about the same diameter as the original hose. Now I've not actually shrunk this because it's just about the right thickness, and I also had the end of the original rubber hose was actually stuck into the sort of arm, so I've taken that off and glued it on the end. I'm just going to use that as my replacement hose. I think it will look quite nice. So we can just slot this over for the moment. I don't really think it needs to actually be in place, but you just sort of get the idea. If I put this on, you'll see that that will look pretty reasonable once it's on. Yeah, we can now go ahead and try and put the rest of this figure back together and see if my repaired screw sort of pegs have worked. Now I did mention earlier that I thought the springs were a little bit over strong in Shockwave shoulders. That's one of the original springs, and you can see if I put that in there, this is the little ratchet mechanism that goes on the front of it. When you push on it, there really is a lot of spring there. It's actually quite a force. I think that is what is pushing Shockwave's chest away from his body and causing it to break. So what I've done is I've just done a quick test. I've chopped the sort of top one rotation's worth off one of the springs. So you can see here it's now slightly shorter. And if we put that in, do the same thing, there is still a lot of spring there and enough for the ratchet mechanism to work, but not enough, I don't think, to break the chest. So I'm going to do the same on this other spring. So I've got a pair of wire cuts here, and I'm just going to cut the top of this spring off, just about one sort of rotation's worth. I was looking at buying some replacement springs, but I couldn't find anything that fitted exactly, so I just thought I'd risk it. It's no harm done here. So again, you can see I've cut that just a bit shorter. That was actually slightly longer. I don't think it will make much difference. Let's just trim that down a little bit more so it's nearer the same length, like that. We can now go ahead and we'll put Shockwave together and see if that has made a difference. Now putting Shockwave together is a little bit tricky just because there's so many parts and he's a very awkward figure to work on. So first up we have the two little latch mechanisms. These go onto the screw posts and with the latch part pointing forwards because it actually latches onto the front of the chest there. Then we put on the springs, so I'm going to put those springs on that way round. So here we have his right arm. That one goes there. You can't really sort of put anything in place because it's all going to sort of fall out, so we just sort of rest things for the moment and we'll get it together as we get the back on. This is his left arm. I've actually detached the front section because that's where the wiring goes. I'll put that together again once we're done. So that goes on this side, and then we get his back in, which is this. We also need to put his head on at the same time, which again gets more awkward, so that requires a spring that goes on that little post there. And then we can put his head on top of the spring and sort of get it in place. So you have to hold all of these components together and then sort of put him together and make sure all the screw holes line up. It's a bit of a pain, so I'm just going to do it. I'm probably not going to talk while I'm doing this because this is a bit of a pain, but it can be done. Okay, so the top part of his chest is now together, and this is where we're going to have a slight issue because you can see this is the same effect that was happening at the top, but it's now happening at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is put a couple of screws in the top just to see if these arm sort of post repairs have worked, and if that has worked, I'm going to gently squeeze the lower part of his body together and we'll screw that together and see if it all holds in place. I have no idea if it will because obviously this plastic is quite brittle. If it doesn't, I have a slight alternative to doing this screw here, but let's see if it will work with the screws that came with the figure to start with. Okay, well, with much more sort of messing about and gently teasing and moving things around, I actually think I've got it back together. I don't think these have re-cracked. They're certainly holding in place much better. So hopefully that plastic weld is working, and reducing the spring certainly has helped. You can see I've actually managed to get this back together, and it is holding pretty well. This side is slightly wider, but that one is holding nicely. I can try doing the screw up a bit more on this right shoulder and see if it makes any difference. If the peg has broken, then this will make no difference at all. Oh no, that is actually tightening up quite nicely. So I think I'm going to say that has worked. It still feels ever so delicate, but it has worked. So I'm going to now reattach his left arm, and we'll see if we can get that light working. But on the whole, he's holding together. So I can also go and do this on my other Shockwave and see if that works just as well. The other Shockwave had a much wider gap, but for the moment that does look like it's holding. So let's get this light reattached. Again, I've just got to solder those two wires onto the light that's broken there, and we'll see if we can get that going. But oh, I'm ever so hopeful. And here are the two Shockwaves finished off. As you can see, I've managed to get the one on the right looking in a pretty good condition. I've taken sort of the best bits of this one and mixed them together with this one, and they both stand up really nicely now. You can actually sort of hold them and move them, and they don't sort of fall down, which is what was happening right at the start of this video. Also, you can see that both sets of shoulders are now sort of firmly held together. It's still got a little bit of a bend on it, this one, just because the plastic is so bad. I'm hoping over time that will sort of settle down. And if that plastic weld hadn't worked, I did mention I had an idea for another way of doing it. Actually, the sort of screw holes on there are very long, and the screw only holds into the sort of top small section of it. So what I've done is I'd bought some longer screws. I'd been onto eBay, I'd measured the screws that were in here, which are 2mm diameter and about 1 centimetre long. So I'd bought some that are 1.6 centimetres long, and I was going to sort of replace the short screws with these long screws. Hopefully these would then screwed into a bit of the plastic that hadn't broken. So that was my alternative fix, but in the end I didn't actually need them. It seems to have worked what I've done. So both of these are now working. I can show you I've put batteries in this one on the right, so if I press his button he will fire his laser and the light should light up. If I switch the switch on the back, it will make a different an even more loud noise. As you can see, that is really quite loud, but both of those work. I've only got one battery at the moment, but the guy on the left does work. So he was a little bit of a fiddly figure to fix, just because the plastic seems to have gone quite brittle over the years, and I know this happens with quite a lot of toys, so you just have to be patient and careful with them. And as you can see, with some effort I've managed to get him working. So I do need to say a massive thank you to Michael Schaefer, who very kindly sent over a big box of Transformers for me to work on. This is the second one that I've got up and running out of that box. If you've enjoyed this video, then make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching toy-polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow toy-polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.